And welcome to Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Good afternoon, Ray.
Hello, Keith. How are you on this beautiful fall day?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. Um, you had I saw on social media where you were busy yesterday.
Oh my goodness. I had 50 people from the Fairfield Ladies Club
Huh?
here all day, took them to all the museums, and we rung the International Friendship Bell. I thought they're never going to quit there. They had a good time.
Well,
So
good.
I was glad to entertain them
All right, great,
yesterday.
great. All right, well, we've got a special guest today, Ray. Why don't you
We
introduce?
do. We have absolutely do. We have Ann Hagedorn with us today. She is a well-known published author. The book that I'm so proud of is The Sleeper Agent, which is about George Koval, the spy here in Oak Ridge. And we're going to talk to her about that. But I've just learned that the book has been recognized for an Edgar Award and that it has also been recognized by Barnes and Noble as their book of the month, I believe. Maybe it was book of the year, but at any rate, it's being well recognized and getting Oak Ridge some good attention because he literally was here in Oak Ridge. And by the way, we had Ann. She was gracious enough to come to Oak Ridge and to speak to us at our lunch for literacy, and we really appreciate her coming and doing that. And of course, she was here to do research as well. So she's been to Oak Ridge a few times, and we asked her if she'd come on today and let us talk a little bit about her book. And of course, she's got other books that she's written too, and we may talk about some of them. But we want to focus on the sleeper agent, Ann. So we're really glad to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's an honor to be with you also. My times at Oak Ridge have been fabulous. Whether researching or promoting the book or talking about literacy, it's a fabulous place with an stunning future and also quite memorable past. You can't get enough of the past details at Oak Ridge for a variety of reasons, because it was so secretive for so many years. So it has that lure. But at any rate, people like you, Ray, make it all possible.
Oh, thank you. We do have a lot of history here, and
Well, yeah.
we have a lot of pride in that.
Yeah. So
You looked into a period of in our history that we probably knew very little about. I knew the name George Koval, and I
right.
figured out that he was in Oak Ridge, and that's about all I knew at the time. So,
Well,
first of all, what interested you in the story? What brought it?
Well, I think for the listening audience, I think I should do what we call the elevator pitch.
Okay, good.
Okay. And should I do the skyscraper elevator pitch or the two-story condo? But anyhow, let me just summarize it to grab people. And then the fact that this Soviet spy lived in Oak Ridge and operated within the confines of the Manhattan Project for 11 months, from August of 1944 to June of early August to late June of 1945. Anyhow, so Sleeper Agent, the elevator pitch is Sleeper Agent is the biography of the only Soviet military trained spy to have full security clearance in America's top secret project to build the atomic bomb. First atomic bomb. So George Koval, as you said, was his name, and he was a U.S. Army corporal when he was at Oak Ridge, and then he was transferred to Dayton because of his expertise in health physics and the production of polonium. Anyhow, he was born and raised in Iowa. He charmed everyone he met. I read through roughly 5,000 pages of FBI reports, that included ones directly about him, and then ones, interviews with colleagues, his former girlfriends, et cetera, et cetera. So I got a good grip on who he was. I think he blended into American culture. That's so clear. He loved baseball. He was a Yankees fan. He was even a skilled shortstop. He could reel off the history and the stats of every big league pitcher at the time when he was in the United States between 1940 and 1948. He played bridge. He belonged to 2 bowling leagues in New York City. He could recite verses. There were people who, in the interviews, the FBI interviews, who talked about how he could recite Walt Whitman and Longfellow. And as I learned from the FBI interviews of many, many people, he was quite the ladies' man. So he obviously blended well into American culture, which is sort of the definition of a sleeper agent. A sleeper agent is a spy without legal diplomatic cover, and one who blends into everyday life in the target country. And he blended in quite well. And all the while, and evidence of 2 meetings that he had at Oak Ridge, one in the spring of 1944 and 1945, and then one in early June 1945. Anyhow, he was sending atomic secrets to Moscow to help speed up the creation of their own atomic bomb. So, and the subtitle of the book, The Man Who Got a Soviet Spy in America Who Got Away, as that reveals, he was never caught, which was, of course, quite a challenge for the research, and made my visits to Oak Ridge and digging through the Oak Ridge archives all the more important, because the fact that he was never caught, there were no trial transcripts. And so, spies don't leave breadcrumbs for biographers, but a spy that doesn't get caught, not only are there no breadcrumbs left, but there are no court records. So there was a heck of a lot of research that had to be done, to reveal who he really was, why he did what he did, and why he wasn't caught exactly. The hardest part was probably exactly what he did send to the Soviet Union, and et cetera, et cetera. But you wanted to know how I tuned into him, and that was completely by accident, because I was interviewing someone in the year 2016, and for another book idea. I was between books, and when I'm between books, I'm looking for the next one. And so I was interviewing people for an idea I had. I loved it, but I could not get, there's a difference between a topic and a story. And I had a great topic. It was about the ambulance men in World War I, and it was fabulous. But I just could not get that storyline or narrative that would bring alive the issues and the details for the general reader, because that's what I do. It's it's the genre of narrative nonfiction. So I was interviewing this guy. He was 92 years old, fabulous. He was the grandson, actually, of one of the people I was researching. And at the end of the interview, he said, "Oh, by the way, did you know about the Soviet spy who lived in Dayton, Ohio during the war?" And he knew that I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. So I said, "No, I really don't know about that." And he said, "Well, it happened." And so I said, "Well, what was his name?" And so he said, "Well, I don't know his name, but I know it's true." So I said, "Well, I so appreciate the time you gave me today. It was a great interview. And, stay safe and healthy. So so I went back to my persistence for that other topic, that searching for the best narrative story, and I couldn't get it out of my system. It's that combination of huge skepticism. I mean, writers get people coming to them all the time, with ideas, and it's wonderful that people do that, but they don't always work. And so with spies, it's so alluring that, it could have easily been a rumor.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stop thinking about it. So that mix of curiosity and skepticism, just drove me to researching it. And so very quickly, I found out by going on the internet, which I always tell writing students, don't do it. Go to archives, go to libraries, go to the National Archives, go to, the Oak Ridge Archives, but don't rely on all bits and pieces of research for writing history being digitized. And so, but immediately I found an article that had been published in the New York Times about 10 years before about a guy named George Koval, who had posthumously received a very high award from Vladimir Putin. And the writer said this spy was one of the most important spies of the 20th century. And then it said he had been at Oak Ridge. And I think later in the article, it said that he was at Dayton. So it mentioned Dayton. I thought, well, this is it. So from then on, that would have been late 2016, probably the autumn of 2016. I did nothing else but research, find out who he was. And as I said, answering all those questions, So that's the easiest way to say, I still had a lot of skepticism, and I have all these requirements. I call it my flight plan, but all these requirements early on in the research of something like that. And so there were a lot of questions that had to be answered before I could really, call my editor, call my agent, and propose it. But I was really very, very interested. It just it hits you on a very deep level because of wanting to understand why he made certain decisions in his life. And there's just so much intrigue, everything from his handler, his cover shop on West 23rd Street in Manhattan. He lived in the Bronx. And then all the women he dated, I found that rather fascinating. And so there was just so much that was fascinating about his personality, the decisions he made, and, what he got away with. So,
Yes, that's true.
So you said he was born. You said he was born in Iowa.
He was born in Iowa, Sioux City, Iowa.
So he was an American.
He's a U.S.
U.S. citizen. How did he? I mean, without giving too much, of course, we want people to read your book. Go out and get your book and read it. But give in a nutshell, how did he become a Soviet spy?
Yeah. And why wasn't he caught? Well, yeah. Very good question. Why did he become a Soviet spy? Well, if I could have ever interviewed him, which of course I couldn't, but that would have been my first question. Not my first, but I would have worked into that. What made you do it? And what you have to do is what a professor at Columbia, I had always said, put yourself on a shelf and put yourself in the shoes of the people you're writing about. So you have to put yourself into the time frame of George Koval's life. And his parents had come to America in 1910. They had been victims of the Russian pogroms. His father, he grew up in a family that was totally committed to the ideal of ending world oppression. And And in his 20s, not in his 20s, but in the 1920s, in Iowa, there was a growing threat of the Ku Klux Klan. It was expanding like crazy. And there was so much anti-Semitism. And his parents were very involved with what Stalin was organizing in the Soviet Far East, which was called the Jewish Autonomous Region. And so his father, George's father, became very involved in trying to persuade a lot of Jewish families to move to the Jewish Autonomous Region in the 1930s. And so in 1932, the father, and this is a very key thing, this is very important, because the father took out a family passport, which meant George's name as one of the three sons was not on the passport. So they left America in 1932 for the Soviet Union, for the Soviet Far East, and were some of the early settlers in that movement. It was called the Birobizan movement. And so then George became a star. George Koval graduated from high school at the age of 15. He was a star in everything he ever did. He was exceptionally bright. And so he earns a scholarship from to Mendeleev Institute in Moscow. When he's working hard in the Soviet Far East, he goes there and he gets a degree in chemistry. And his plan is to get a graduate degree in chemistry. I think he was accepted in the first week of September of 1939. Now, remember what happened in September 1939. The beginning of World War II. And so he could no longer, enroll in school in the Soviet Union and not be drafted. And that summer, he had been interviewed by the Red Army intelligence because he was a star in science and chemistry at Mendeleev. He spoke English without an accent. Actually, he was having a hard time. In one of his letters that he sent back to America in the 1930s, he said that he was having a hard time learning Russian. So he played baseball. He had grown up in America. If you were the GRU, if you were Red Army intelligence, would you not look at this guy and say, you are a gem, we need you? So he was being recruited by Red Army intelligence to be an officer sent to America with the assignment of finding out what the Americans were doing in terms of their chemical weapons. Because remember what happened in World War I with chemical weapons, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a matter of big concern. And so that was his assignment. And from all the records that I could gather and letters and various documents, it looked like he wasn't ready to say yes until certain things happened that would have put his family at risk during the war. And that was partly because his wife he got married in 1936, and his wife was from the aristocracy. Her father had been part of the Tsar's army, and there were all kinds of things in her family that put her at risk, and then would have put his whole family at risk because of the association. So in order to protect his family, and also, because of the war beginning, and he was going to be drafted anyhow. And so they told him, we will send you will be there for 2 years. We'll send your wife over at some point, but you'll only be there for 2 years, and we're going to send you to America with that assignment, chemical weapons. So he ended up staying for 8 years. His wife was never sent. And you have to read the book to find out what he did.
Sure.
But at any rate, so in my humble opinion, he yes, he's a traitor from our point of view. He was a traitor, but on the other hand, if you put yourself in his shoes in the timeline of his life, and then what was happening in the world, then you kind of start to understand, don't you, why he said yes to the GRU. If he even had a choice after September 1st, 1939. So that's what happened. And then he went into training, and then for almost a year, and then ended up returning to America in October. I think it was October of 1940. And that was very hard to uncover how he got back in. But you have to remember that his name was not on the passport in 1932. So guess what? He could fill out all kinds of forms, applications, and his military forms, so that he was George Koval, who had never left America.
Right.
So he could use his name, and he could get into the U.S. Army, and he could use his name because, according to the records, he had never left. And he also had people in Sioux City who would back that.
So when he was in Oak Ridge, I guess he was a military. He was
Yes.
in the military, so he was part of the special
engineer detachment.
Yeah. Special engineer. Yes.
Yeah.
And and what I discovered at Oak Ridge, I mean, I'm so grateful for the people there, and how day after day I would go to the Oak Ridge Library, into the Oak Ridge room, and just dig through, file after file after file. But the greatest part of that was that, in all of whether you're talking about the military files at the National Archives or the FBI files, whatever, all it said was that George Koval was at Oak Ridge, and at Dayton afterwards. Nothing about what he did on a daily basis. So, by digging through all those wonderful files, and the librarians, the archivist for the Oak Ridge room, I have all those names in the acknowledgments. Anyhow, what they helped me discover was that what his daily routines were. He was a health physicist, and that health physicist, department, the concept came from Oak Ridge for all the sites. I think it was started at Oak Ridge. Isn't that right, Ray?
Yeah, you're correct. Yes, it was.
And so what does that mean? Well, that means that, so I looked it up and saw the manual, and, all of the stuff for the instruction manual. The instruction manual says that every health physicist has to know all operations in the area. Think about that. This is a Soviet spy. Be alert to all changes. Make thorough surveys on a regular basis in all facilities. What's another one? They were asked to be present whenever there was repair work done in any of the facilities, the plants. Anytime anything was shipped from Oak Ridge, say to Los Alamos, there had to be someone from the health physics department present. It just goes on and on. So this is a guy who was, and he had a Jeep, because as Ray could explain, the miles between, K25, X10, and
Y12.
Y12. So he had a Jeep, an Army Jeep. But
How did you learn that? that he had a Jeep?
Well, because that is something that was I think that was in one of the interviews in the FBI reports. It's in the book.
Okay.
And also,
right.
oh, I know. And it was when I interviewed one of his colleagues from Oak Ridge. He was 98 years old when I interviewed him. Do you
What
remember
was
that?
his name? George, was it? I'm not sure. I met with a person that knew him and talked with him on the phone for years, George Cramish.
Oh, no, that Arnold. Yeah. Yeah.
Arnold, you're
Yeah,
right. Arnold Cramish.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, Arnold Cramish unfortunately passed away in 2010. And
Oh, okay.
I am so is it envious or jealous of the fact that you could interview and talk to Arnold? No, this was someone I discovered while I was trying to find photos and get the rights to the photos. And this guy, he's in the book. I give him lots of credit. He double dated with George at Oak Ridge.
I remember that in the book, but I can't remember.
Dwayne Weiss.
Yeah. Okay.
He was 98 when I interviewed him, and that was a while ago. And I sent him a copy of the book and all that. Terrific guy. And he was the one who told me that he and George took a leave to New York toward the end of May 1945 or early June 1945. And he said he would never forget it because they went together. And then at Penn Station or wherever, they must have taken a train to New York. George said, "I'll see you in a week." And he just disappeared, basically. Then they met up again and went back, and he never talked about his trip at all. And he said he was never suspicious of that. But what he was suspicious of was the Jeep. So he brought up the Jeep. I never even asked him. And I said, he was very suspicious of that. Why would he get this Jeep? And so he planted a seed for me, thinking that maybe there's something here. I better really be sure that George wasn't a double agent or something. And so really check that out very thoroughly. And he wasn't. And so we know he had the Jeep, probably because everything points to X10. X10 was his, and Dwayne told me that they dated sisters. They double dated sisters, and the woman that George was dating worked at X10. And X10 was, of course, doing this very successful plutonium production and very secretly polonium. And so George became an expert in both of those, not just because he was driving there on a regular basis and checking out things, but he dated somebody who was working there. And I know they were not supposed to talk about things, but but I mean, really, Ray, so at any rate, so I'm pretty confident about the Jeep. But one thing I did try to do was find out the other way to confirm it through the U.S. military, and I wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, well, people are questioning it here who remember. Well, they're all gone now, but back during the time we were talking, they said, nobody had Jeeps. Well, yeah, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but it seems like
Dwayne said he never understood why George he was very suspicious. The only thing that was suspicious in his mind, and he wasn't thinking that he was a spy. Right. He was just thinking that somehow he was somehow very close.
He was getting special privilege is what he was thinking, because only the higher ups would have been in a military vehicle, not the corporal. You know what I mean?
Right, that's right. And so that very suspicious to me, except then once again you have to go to what he was doing on a daily basis. And he
that,
probably had to, probably his job, I mean, we know he was a health physicist. We know what they did. And if we probably could dig far enough into the records, we could find out exactly what his daily routine was. I couldn't find it. Yeah.
no, and I couldn't either. I questioned that when I understood what he had done here, because in reality, people were not allowed to go from one point to another. In other words, if you worked at Y12, you didn't have access to X10 or to K25. And generally, you only had access to one or two buildings at Y12. So General Groves emphasized compartmentalization, is what he called it.
Right.
But the fact that there were only a few health physicists makes
right.
me wonder if he could not have had more mobility than maybe a general worker would have had. So
Yep. And here's a quote from one of the people in the book who was kind of an expert on the radiation safety, and whom I interviewed. No, I didn't interview. I found out. I read all of his interviews with the FBI, and the importance of the radiation safety in terms of what he was sending to the Soviet Union. You know, because what George did for the Soviet Union was really speed things up. You know, they had if you think of how long it took, well, I mean, you could look at the other way. It's one of the most amazing details in American history, how quickly Oak Ridge was developed, how quickly the atomic bomb was developed. But then you read the details of what they went through to figure out the polonium. They had two ways of doing it. And what was happening, X10 was the big experiment for, doing it, manufacturing polonium from the irradiated bismuth. So there was, the concept of speed is very relative here. And so, but if you look at how long it took to figure those things out and the experiments that were happening in Oak Ridge. Now, so
who was it you were talking?
Go ahead.
Who were you learning that from? You were starting to tell us who you had, the interview you had seen.
Oh yeah. That, I think it was Seymour Bloch. Okay. I think it was Seymour Bloch talking about the importance of the radiation safety, the information that was sent to the Soviet Union about that, and how that especially was invaluable to them toward the end, which would have been in the spring of 1949, when George wrote a huge report on that on March 1st, 1949, because they were coming to the end of things, and the radiation safety was more important than ever. So, but anyhow, going back to Oak Ridge, so I always operate with the watchguard of skepticism. So I felt the same way you do about the Jeep. But then when I got into those archives in the Oak Ridge room and realized exactly what those highly, is elite the right word? There weren't that many health physicists.
They were specialized,
They were very specialized.
Yeah.
They were from the Special Engineer Detachment. They were highly respected. And, and they had training for a year at some university. And for George, it was City College of New York, and Arnold Kramish also, I think.
Yes, I think so. I think that's where they met first.
Yeah. So they were highly trained. They had been selected to do this. And the geography, the placement of the plants required it required a vehicle to be able to do what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, it could very well be the case, for sure. I want to touch 2 points. One, when you made a point about him being so his character being such that he could easily attract people, that he was accepted by folks. I've heard the story, and I'm sorry, I don't know if I got it out of your book or where I may have picked it up, of how he got into California when he was coming back on a ship, coming over from Russia. He had enamored himself with the captain of the ship to the degree that he literally walked off of the ship into the United States with the captain and was never inspected, never passed.
Yeah, that's right. But he did have a false passport. I did confirm that later. And so I guess they had him ready for anything.
They did prepare him well, yeah.
Yeah, so I think well, that I have to attribute that was very hard to find, because I was looking for, and my wonderful Russian translator found a book in Russian, of course, that had in the notes letters that he had written to his wife on the way over, and that the ship's captain took back to Vladivostok and had sent to the wife. And so Masha, the Russian translator, she translated them, and that's how we got part of the story. And then part of it was that one of his students asked him how he did that, and he told the story to a class, and it would have been had to have been in the 1980s or 1990s, and one of those students ended up writing about him later. And so Masha found a confirmation, because I go usually with the rule of three. You got to confirm things from three different sources. But it explained the details. What we never could confirm was then what happened next, and so, he ended up in New York like a month later. But what he did between landing in San Francisco and then getting a place to live in the Bronx, and connecting with his handler on West 23rd Street in Manhattan, all of that, the in-between, that's why I say in the source notes essay, or I guess in the acknowledgments, I say, I hope that the research that I did opens the door for more research to find answers. One of the book signings I did, a gentleman came to the book signing table and introduced himself as the grandson of the man that George Koval's roommate in Dayton.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, so do you have letters? Do you have diaries? Let's talk. This was just a couple months ago. So you just never know. But there's, or when I was in Oak Ridge, the woman who came to the signing table and said she was, George Koval's code name was Delmar. He had two, Agent D and Delmar. Yeah. And so somebody came to the signing table. Do you remember this? And she said she knew where the name Delmar came from. And so we'll just say to the audience, read the book and you will find out.
Yeah.
But there's so many unanswered questions, and without being able to interview George Koval, we don't know everything. On the other hand, we have, many of the facts. I put together many facts, and not all the women are in the book. And so, because I have this absolutely fabulous editor, and he didn't want me to put all the women in. And, obviously his dating all these women, every one of them I did research on, and they either had a sister or a father, or they were working in the Manhattan Project. So he wasn't being James Bond, really. He was just being smart, and he never he belonged to a conservative political club, at CCNY. He never hung out with other communists. You know, he wasn't a member of the Communist Party USA. So he knew he was smart.
Yeah, he was.
You know, he was smart. And, so I think of his life, and he was very loyal to his family and to his ideals. But, unfortunately, those ideals made him go down in our history as a traitor.
That's true. And he never really got recognition during his life.
No.
Even Russia, he did not get recognized there until after he had passed. And according to Arnold Kramish, he was bitter about that in the latter part of his life.
It must have been really painful. But also, you have to read, and we say this to the audience, you must read part 3 of Sleeper Agent, because then you see what he came back to. I mean, there wasn't exactly, he was told he was going to be there for 2 years. He was there for 8 years. He gets back. There's no parade for him, not at all, because he's American and he's Jewish. And that was when Stalin's anti-Semitism was just, soaring. It was horrifying. And so he and Stalin hated Americans and didn't trust them. And he hated, obviously, he was an anti-Semite. And so so George came back to a period, that's the fall of 1948. Look it up. I mean, or read the book. And but at any rate, that is a very frightening experience for someone to come home. And his wife had developed terrible toxicity from terrible illness from the toxicity at the chemical plant where she had worked. I mean, and his parents were still in Birabizan, and there was a raid against the Jews in Birabizan, and the Yiddish theater was destroyed and all kinds of things. So that's what he came back to. So I think, in my humble opinion, if you look at how many times George Koval went back to school, when you read the book, keep an account of the times he goes to school. School and science were his refuge. So what did he do? He went back to school. He got an advanced degree from Mendeleev, and then after Stalin dies, he sends a letter, to Beria, the one of the executives under Secret Service under Stalin. And while Beria is still alive, he tells him, you have to help me get a job. Look what I did for the Soviet Union. And you have to help me do this. And now I have this advanced degree, et cetera, et cetera. And so Beria did. He contacted the head of Mendeleev Institute and said, if we need to send someone from the GRU to your institute to explain exactly what this guy did for us during the war, let me know. If not, fine, respect him and give him a good job. So, so then the rest of his life, then he taught at Mendeleev. So I think school was his shelter.
I agree. Yeah.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I agree. That was where he turned. It was what he knew and what he could do, and he was not getting any help.
No.
Except a few express that he was able to get from that one individual. The rest of his life, he was a terrible disappointment to him because the country that he gave so much for.
8 years.
Yeah.
8 years. I mean, and he could have stayed if it weren't for, if it weren't for his huge loyalty to his family, a lot of people would have just stayed in America. I mean, he could have continued to blend in, perhaps. He so far in 1948, he had avoided the House Un-American Activities. He had avoided Hoover. I mean, Hoover didn't discover him until July of 1954, I think, and tried to extradite him, and he couldn't do that. And so But anyhow, like that professor I had at Columbia years ago, got to put yourself in the time period. You got to put yourself in the shoes of the people and to understand their decisions. But here is the big question for me, anyhow, is whether or not he did it because he believed in nuclear parity. Did he do that because, number one, he was a scientist? And I searched for that. And if Arnold Kramish had been alive still, I think he would have known the answer to that.
I think he might. And the other well-known spy, Klaus Fuchs, they make the same claim about him, that it was a nuclear parity issue with him.
Right.
And I don't know what might have been driving George Koval. I don't know. But it's very interesting to learn about him from the details that you were able to turn up in your research.
Well, thank you, Ray.
I was so delighted because I only knew a little bit, and what I'd talked with Arnold was so exciting. But then when you put it all together in the book, I really appreciate that. Well,
and then to the readers, Arnold Kramish comes up in part 3.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and toward the end of the book, and, you have to really respect Arnold Kramish for the things that he said about George when he was interviewed in 2007, after George got the posthumous award. Then immediately, I think he's quoted in that New York Times article that I found.
He is. I think you're exactly right. So,
and he never ditched George as a friend,
We're close. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen just to show folks a picture of the book that we've been talking about, The Sleeper Agent. And let me share that just quickly. And there you can see what it looks like, the atomic spy in America who got away. And I encourage you to get that book. It's available on Amazon or any of your bookstores that you want to look for.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing, Ray, the book was a finalist for the Edgar Awards, but it didn't win it. Yeah, I'm a fact checker, so that should assure the audience that what you read is really true, because she would like to have been a winner, but she was a finalist, and Ray gave her the chance to be a winner for about a half an hour, but it wasn't. Yeah, thank you, but yeah.
I told you I didn't make notes.
Finalist, one of 6 finalists. What? Yeah.
I said I told you I didn't make notes. I should have.
Yeah. You are fabulous, and Oak Ridge is fabulous, and that history is just it's endless, because we will constantly be discovering new things that require digging into the past and finding great stories, and hopefully a lot of strong individuals that teach us something.
All right. Well, very good. Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Do we have somebody else lined up for our next one?
Okay.
We do. We have a young man, Riley Fitzpatrick, who is making a documentary or making a film about Oak Ridge. And he interviewed me the other day, and I talked to him, and I said, well, when you get ready, we'd like you to come and talk to us about the film you're producing. So he'll be our guest at the next time.
All right. Okay. Very good. All right, folks. Thanks for watching. And
thank you
again. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.